What hurts a woman the most when she stops feeling valued? Not the arguments, not the forgotten anniversaries, not even the harsh words said in the heat of a bad moment. It's the silence that comes after she stops trying to be seen. And once you understand why that silence is so dangerous, you'll never look at a quiet woman the same way again. Because here's what nobody tells you. A woman who is hurting loudly is still fighting for the relationship. She's still invested. But a woman who has gone quiet, who has stopped asking for what she needs, who smiles politely and changes the subject when something bothers her, that woman has already started to leave. Not physically, not yet, but somewhere inside, a door has closed, and most people don't even notice it happening until it's too late to open again. Stay with me, because we're going to walk through exactly what this pain looks like, why it happens, and more importantly, what it teaches us about self-respect, about being seen, and about what it really means to value someone. This isn't just about relationships between two people. It's about something every one of us has felt at some point, the ache of giving your presence to a space that stopped noticing you were even there. Let's start with the thing most people get wrong. When we think about a woman feeling undervalued, we picture something dramatic, a betrayal, a public humiliation, a devastating fight. But real emotional pain rarely announces itself. It creeps in through the small moments, the comment that goes unacknowledged, the effort that goes unnoticed, the day she planned something thoughtful and it was met with a shrug instead of gratitude. These moments feel small individually, but they stack. And what they build over time is a quiet, corrosive belief, I don't matter here. You know the feeling. Maybe not in this exact context, but somewhere in your life you felt what it's like to give and give and give and watch it disappear into a void with no echo back. That's the emotional experience we're talking about. And for a woman who has built her sense of connection around being attuned, around noticing, around caring for the emotional temperature of a relationship, this kind of invisibility doesn't just sting, it changes her. Let's talk about Sarah. Sarah's 31, she works in marketing, and for 2 years, she did all the invisible labor of her relationship. She remembered her mother's birthday. She noticed when he was stressed before he said a word. She planned the trips, smoothed the arguments with his friends, kept the emotional wheels turning. And for a long time, she didn't mind. She loved doing it. Love, to her, looked like attentiveness. But one evening, she mentioned, gently, almost as an afterthought, that she'd had a hard day. And he nodded, scrolled his phone, and said, "That's rough," without looking up. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't even memorable to him, but something in Sarah shifted that night. Not because of that one moment, but because that one moment was the 100th version of the same moment. And she realized, quietly, sitting on her own couch, I have been the only one paying attention here. That's the real answer to what hurts a woman the most. Not conflict, not distance. Attention that flows only one direction for so long that she starts to wonder if she was ever really seen at all. If you've ever felt like the only one keeping a relationship alive, write, I see it, in the comments. Here's the old pattern, the one so many of us fall into without realizing it. We assume that as long as nothing is actively wrong, everything must be fine. No fighting means peace. No complaints means contentment. But that's a dangerous assumption, because a woman who has learned that her needs aren't being met often stops voicing them, not because she's fine, but because she's tired. Tired of being the one who always brings it up, tired of feeling like an inconvenience for wanting to be noticed. And so she goes quiet, and quiet gets mistaken for peace. The new pattern, the one that actually protects connection, is attentiveness that doesn't wait to be asked for. It's noticing the shift in her voice before she has to explain it. It's asking, how are you really? And actually waiting for the answer. Presence isn't a grand gesture. It's 1,000 small acts of noticing, repeated so consistently that she never has to wonder if she matters. Being unseen doesn't just hurt, it teaches a person to stop hoping to be seen at all. Now let's go deeper, because there's a second layer to this pain that's even harder to talk about: the exhaustion of emotional labor. A woman who feels undervalued isn't just hurt by what's missing, she's often depleted by what she's been carrying alone. Remembering everyone's schedules, managing the emotional undercurrents of a household, anticipating problems before they happen, this labor is largely invisible, which means it's also largely unappreciated, and there is a specific, quiet devastation in exhausting yourself for a role nobody acknowledges you're playing. Think about Elena, 42, a mother of two in Austin. For years, she was the family's emotional infrastructure, the one who remembered the pediatrician appointments, who noticed when her son was being bullied before anyone said a word, who kept the peace between her husband and his brother during holidays. She never asked for credit. But one Thanksgiving, her husband thanked everyone at the table for coming and forgot to mention her at all. Not out of malice, just out of blindness to how much she carried. She didn't make a scene. She smiled, passed the potatoes, and later that night, alone in the bathroom, she cried for reasons she couldn't fully explain, even to herself. It wasn't about Thanksgiving. It was about years of invisible weight finally cracking under its own silence. This is the part people miss. Undervaluing someone isn't always active disrespect. Sometimes it's simply forgetting to look. But the impact is the same either way, a slow erosion of the belief that effort is worth giving. If carrying the invisible weight of a relationship sounds painfully familiar, write the weight below. The old pattern here is assuming that love is measured by grand gestures, the flowers, the anniversary dinners, the big declarations. But those moments are easy. Anyone can show up for the highlight reel. The new pattern, the one that actually builds lasting value, is acknowledging the unglamorous everyday labor that holds a relationship together. Saying thank you for the small things, noticing the invisible effort out loud, because what goes unnoticed long enough eventually goes unoffered. The people who feel most loved aren't the ones who receive the biggest gestures, they're the ones whose quiet effort gets seen. There's a third layer to this, and it's perhaps the most painful of all: the moment a woman stops explaining herself. Early in any relationship, romantic, familial, even professional, a woman who cares will explain her feelings. She'll say, "It hurt when you said that," or "I needed you to check in on me today." This explaining is actually a form of hope. It says, "I still believe you'll understand if I just say it clearly enough." But hope has a shelf life when it isn't met with change. And when explanation after explanation goes nowhere, something shifts. She stops explaining, not because the hurt disappeared, but because she's concluded that explaining doesn't work here. This is one of the quietest, most devastating turning points in any relationship, because from the outside, it can look like things have gotten better. The arguments stop, the tension seems to ease, but what's actually happened is far more serious. She stopped investing her emotional energy into being understood. Consider Maya, 28, from Chicago. For the first year of her relationship, she would tell her partner exactly what upset her and why. She'd say things like, "When you cancel plans last minute, I feel like I'm not a priority." At first, he'd apologize, promise to do better, and sometimes he did, for a while. But the pattern kept repeating, and slowly, Maya stopped bringing it up, not because it stopped bothering her, but because she got tired of feeling like she was talking to a wall that occasionally nodded back. By the time he noticed she'd gone quiet, he thought it meant she was happier. She wasn't. She had simply stopped trying to be heard. You stop explaining. You stop hoping. You stop believing your voice will change anything. And that, more than any single fight, is the moment a relationship begins to hollow out from the inside. The old pattern is treating silence as resolution. If she's not bringing it up anymore, it must not bother her anymore, right? Wrong, and dangerously so. The new pattern is recognizing that a woman's silence after a long pattern of unheard explanation isn't peace. It's often grief in disguise. The antidote isn't waiting for her to speak up again. It's proactively asking and then actually adjusting behavior based on what she says, consistently, not just once. Silence isn't always agreement. Sometimes it's the sound of someone giving up quietly, out of love, out of exhaustion, out of self-preservation. If you've ever stopped bringing something up because you were tired of not being heard, type, "I stopped explaining." Now, here's where this conversation needs to take a turn, because understanding pain is only half the picture. The other half is understanding what a woman does with that pain, and this is where self-respect enters the story. Historically, the Stoic philosophers taught something that applies perfectly here, that peace comes not from controlling how others treat us, but from controlling how much of ourselves we continue to offer to those who don't reciprocate. A woman who feels undervalued eventually reaches a fork in the road. One path leads to shrinking, becoming smaller, quieter, more accommodating in the hope that finally she'll be enough. The other path leads to reclamation, recognizing that her worth was never up for negotiation in the first place. This is the part of the story that matters most, because it's not just about romantic relationships. It's about every space in your life where you've given consistently and received little in return. A friendship, a job, a family dynamic. The lesson is the same everywhere. Value isn't something you can beg someone into recognizing. It's something you either honor in yourself or you slowly lose the ability to recognize it at all. And here's the permission so many people need to hear, especially the women watching this right now. Choosing to stop pouring into a space that doesn't value you is not selfish. It is not cold. It is not giving up on love. It is one of the most mature acts of self-respect a person can perform. You are allowed to stop explaining yourself to people who were never really listening. You are allowed to stop shrinking to fit into spaces that only had room for a smaller version of you. That instinct isn't bitterness. It's wisdom earned the hard way. Let's talk about what this looks like when a woman finally reaches that turning point, because it's rarely explosive. It's rarely a dramatic confrontation. Usually, it's quiet. It's the moment she stops waiting for an apology that isn't coming and starts building a life that doesn't require one. It's the moment she redirects the energy she used to spend decoding someone else's mixed signals into decoding her own needs instead. It's the moment she realizes that being valued was never supposed to be something she had to convince someone of. Think of Priya, 36, from Seattle. After years of feeling like an afterthought in her marriage, she didn't leave in a blaze of anger. She simply started, quietly, rebuilding pieces of her own life, reconnecting with old friends, picking up a hobby she'd abandoned a decade earlier, spending Sunday mornings doing something just for herself instead of managing everyone else's needs. Her husband noticed the shift before she said a word about it. He asked her what was different. She said calmly, "I stopped waiting for you to notice me, so I started noticing myself." That sentence changed the entire trajectory of their relationship, not because it was a threat, but because it was true. And truth like that is impossible to ignore. You stop waiting. You stop shrinking. You stop apologizing for taking up space you were always entitled to. And in that stopping, something remarkable happens. You don't become harder, you become clearer. If that sentence hit you, "I stopped waiting for you to notice me, so I started noticing myself," write "clearer" in the comments. There's one more piece of this puzzle worth naming, because it explains why this particular kind of pain cuts so deep. Psychologists who study attachment have long observed that human beings are wired to seek what's called attunement, the felt sense that another person is emotionally tracking us, responding to our internal state, adjusting based on what we need. When that attunement is present, even during conflict, people feel secure. But when attunement is consistently absent, when a person feels like their emotional signals are being sent into empty space, the nervous system itself begins to register that as a kind of threat. Not a bruise you can point to, a slow, cumulative depletion of safety. This is why so many women describe the pain of not being valued not as anger, but as exhaustion, not as rage, but a kind of quiet grief for a connection that technically still exists, but no longer feels alive. And this is exactly why the antidote isn't grand romantic gestures. It's attunement, it's presence, it's the small, consistent signal that says, I see you. I'm tracking you. You don't have to perform for my attention because I'm already paying it. There's one more pattern worth naming before we close, because it's subtle and it catches even the most self-aware people off guard. The difference between being tolerated and being wanted. Tolerance looks like presence without warmth. It's being included in plans out of habit, being spoken to out of obligation, being kept around because separating feels harder than staying. From the outside, tolerance and genuine wanting can look almost identical. The same dinners, the same conversations, the same shared calendar. But a woman feels the difference in her bones long before she can articulate it in words. She feels it in the tone of a, sure, whatever you want, versus a, actually, I'd love that. She feels it in whether her opinions shape decisions or simply get absorbed into someone else's plans. Consider Danielle, 29 from Charlotte. She spent 3 years in a relationship where nothing was ever technically wrong. No fights worth mentioning, no betrayals, no cruelty. Just a low, persistent hum of being managed rather than chosen. Every decision, where to eat, what to watch, how to spend a Saturday, defaulted to what he wanted, with her preferences treated as optional extras rather than equal input. She didn't notice it as a pattern for a long time because each individual moment was so small it barely registered. It was only when a friend asked her, offhandedly, "When's the last time he planned something around what you wanted?" that she realized she couldn't remember. Not because it never happened, because it happened so rarely that her mind had stopped expecting it. That's the particular ache of being tolerated instead of wanted. It doesn't leave bruises, but it leaves a person quietly convinced that their preferences don't matter enough to shape anything, and over time, a person stops offering preferences at all. Not because they don't have them, because offering them and watching them get overlooked again and again is its own kind of exhausting. You stop suggesting restaurants, you stop voicing opinions about the weekend, you stop mentioning what you'd actually like because agreeing is easier than being disappointed. And somewhere in that quiet accommodation, a person disappears a little more each day. If you've ever caught yourself saying, "I don't mind, whatever you want," when you actually did mind, write, "I noticed" in the comments. The old pattern here mistakes agreeableness for harmony. If she's not pushing back, the thinking goes, then everyone must be satisfied with how things are. But real harmony isn't the absence of friction, it's the presence of mutual consideration. The new pattern is actively creating space for her preferences instead of waiting for her to fight for them, asking, "What do you actually want?" and meaning it, building plans around her answers, not just tolerating them when she happens to voice one. Being chosen isn't a single moment. It's a pattern repeated so often that a person never has to wonder if they're an afterthought. So let's bring this all the way back around, because everything we've talked about circles back to one central truth. What hurts a woman the most isn't conflict, isn't distance, isn't even hardship faced together. It's the slow erosion of being seen. The moment invisible effort becomes invisible person. The moment explanation turns to silence. The moment hope quietly closes its own door because it got tired of being answered. But here's the empowering part, the part I want you to walk away with today. That pain, as real as it is not the end of the story. It's often the beginning of something stronger. A woman who learns her worth doesn't require someone else's validation to be real. A woman who learns that walking away from what diminishes her isn't loss, it's reclamation. A woman who learns that being valued starts with the way she values herself first and always. If you're the one who's been carrying the emotional weight, the one who stopped explaining, the one who's gone quiet, I want you to hear this clearly. Your instinct to protect your own peace was never wrong. Noticing yourself, even after everyone else stopped, is not bitterness. It's the beginning of coming home to yourself. And if you're on the other side of this, someone who might be the reason a person in your life has gone quiet, let this be the moment you start paying attention again before the silence becomes permanent. Value isn't proven through grand declarations. It's proven in the 1,000 ordinary moments where someone chooses to see you again and again without being asked. That's the whole answer. That's what this was all about. If this video helped you understand something you felt but never had words for, consider sticking around. There's a whole series here exploring the quiet psychology behind connection, self-respect, and what it really means to be valued. And I think you'll find more of yourself in it than you expect. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of clarity in your life, and come back tomorrow because we're only just getting started. Until then, take care of your peace. Nobody else can do it for you.